Hello and welcome to the No Balls podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McDonald, with me co-host Finn McDonald. Today we are continuing the MLB preseason show. This show is for the NL Central. Today we will cover in order the Milwaukee Brewers, Chicago Cubs, St. Louis Cardinals, Cincinnati Reds, and Pittsburgh Pirates. Finn, before we get started, what do we have on this division and just some minor notes before we start with Milwaukee real quick?
I feel like out of any division, this one has changed the most. Out of any NL.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of volatility within this division. I thought that a year ago when I predicted that three of these teams could make the playoffs. But with that volatility, there's also volatility in the other direction. That's kind of what happened last year. I think with some of the offseason moves, specifically around the reigning champion Brewers that we're going to talk about first, I think this division is still very up in the air, it feels like, and I don't know if I would necessarily say there's an overwhelming favorite in this division. At the end of this episode, we are going to make our prediction for who we think is going to win the division. And after every team, we're going to say whether we think they got better and whether or not we think they set themselves up better in the future. So that's going to be the gist of this episode. I think the elephant in the room that I have to get out the way first, top 50 video coming out next week. There is an NBA film room uploaded instead. Just never had time to sit down and edit the full video. So we'll get started with the Milwaukee Brewers. First thing on the note here, their 2024 payroll compared to what they currently have in 2025. Their total payroll from last year was $114 million versus this season they are currently at $99.9 million. So, cut down $14 million. Let's see how that happened. If we look at their offseason tracker via Fangraphs, they added Tyler Alexander, left-handed pitcher, Irvin Rodriguez on a major league minimum. Jorge Alfaro has agreed to a minor league contract. So let's only talk about the major league ones. Those were the only major league free agents that they signed. Elvin Rodriguez and Tyler Alexander. Their losses, I think, are some bigger ones. Bryce Wilson was a minor league free agent. The more important ones, Willy Adames, Joe Ross, and Holby Milner. And then trade-wise, they traded Devin Williams for Caleb Durbin and Nestor Cortez. And they acquire major league reliever Gray Anderson from the Texas Rangers. Those are their only moves this offseason. Finn, do any of those specifically stand out to you?
Yes, I feel like they could have got more for Devin Williams.
Wow. That's almost opposite of the sentiment that I was going to press out. I feel like this was a pretty solid return for Devin Williams, right? Compared to some of the other reliever trades that have happened, like getting Caleb Durbin, who's a very high probability major leaguer, right? Like he's going to make the opening day roster more likely than not for them. I think is great. And Nestor Cortez is a guy who can easily, he was a year ago, a back end of the rotation arm, and you're getting that for 1 year of a closer. I feel like that's just a pretty solid deal. I mean, it's nothing in terms of the Jason Adam deal that just happened, but I think everybody in their right mind would acknowledge that was because AJ Preller is a maniac. So outside of that deal, this looks pretty good compared to a lot of other reliever trades that happen, and I think it was a good deal for them. I think the big one for them is losing Willy Adames. I think that's going to hurt them a ton. And I mean, we'll go over their depth chart real quick with their lineup. They are projected to line up Jackson Chourio in right field, Christian Yelich at DH, William Contreras at catcher, Garrett Mitchell at center field, Rhys Hoskins at first base, Sal Frelick in left, Bryce Terang at second, Joey Ortiz at shortstop, Oliver Dunn at third base, bench being Tyler Black, Eric Haas, Caleb Durbin, and Blake Perkins. Then, how do we just in general? How do we feel about this position player core that they have here?
Third base, ouch.
Yeah, I think it's not ideal. A year ago, Joey Ortiz gave them a pretty solid season, right? We can't knock what he did for as a rookie for Milwaukee last year playing third base. He bumps over to shortstop with Willy Adames leaving the team. Now at third base, it's looking like a hodgepodge of Oliver Dunn, Tyler Black, Caleb Durbin. I don't like it as much, but like this is a Milwaukee team that you can't just, throw money at every problem they might have. I think, you know, are you looking at Reese Hoskins bounce back to also helping? Because I think you're kind of relying on Reese Hoskins bounce back as well, because a lot of the third base options are also the fallback first base options. So I don't think you can have both positions up in jeopardy if you're the Milwaukee Brewers here. That being said, they have a pretty solid farm system. I don't think they have anybody at first base who's going to come up really anytime soon, but yeah, they can kind of fill some gaps with their farm system if they want to trade for some guys at the deadline. If let's say they're pitching very well and their defense is great, but they don't have any mashers, they can probably fill in some gaps with their farm system, I'm sure. For me, the big one that stuck out is this is a very athletic team, right? You look at Jackson Churio, if he doesn't steal 25 bases next year, I would be very surprised. Christian Yelich was on pace to steal about 35 bags a year ago. Garrett Mitchell steals bases. Bryce Terang stole a ton of bases. That's where a lot of his value comes from. Sal Frelick steals a lot of bases. This is the team that's going to steal bases. Caleb Durbin stole, I think, in the Arizona Fall League, I think he was 11 for 12 in the Arizona Fall League. Speaking of, he played a lot of third base, which he had previously not done in the Yankees system, and he played a lot of third base, a lot of center field in the Arizona Fall League. I think Caleb Durbin's actually a really great ad. So, do you have anything else on their lineup that you want to really point out here?
No, other than losing Willy Adames really hurt.
Yeah, and like for those who don't know, like Willy Adames is like a solidified top 60 player in baseball, no matter who you ask. He's a big loss. I think another thing to point out here too, a ton of platooning that they're going to probably be doing. Um, Tyler Black will probably play some first base consistently. Blake Perkins is probably going to play a lot of center field consistently. Yelich might play some outfield still just to give William Contreras rest days at the catcher position. Uh, I think this is going to be a team that has a lot of platoon things going on. I'm sure you see pretty similarly. You got anything else before we move to their pitching?
Let's move to their pitching.
All right, pitching. Freddie Peralta, Tobias Myers, Nestor Cortez, Aaron Savali, and Aaron Ashby is their projected starting rotation from Fangraphs. I think an important thing to note here, notice how Nestor Cortez is their third starter. They got him from the Devin Williams trade. That's a good trade for them, right? They get 2 years of Nestor Cortez and 6 years of Caleb Durbin.
Rude. Actually, I changed my mind. That is a pretty good return. I thought that Cortez was a walk.
Yeah, Cortez has an extra year available to them. And then, Tobias Myers, not a very proven guy, but is a guy who got them some pretty solid results a year ago. And Freddie Peralta, very consistent, never going to be a top 15 pitcher, but he's always going to range not much lower than 30. So, and then Aaron Savali, Ashby, they'll fill innings, I'm sure, at the bottom of this rotation. I think the big part for them is Robert Gasser, currently on the 60-day IL. I believe had Tommy John surgery in the summer last year, and then Brandon Woodruff, who's made his return last year, only as a reliever, and he is now projected to be back at some point this season into the starting rotation. So I think their rotation looks a lot better when you have Gasser and Woodruff in there, and potentially both in the rotation. What do you feel like on this rotation, Finn?
Yeah, I agree there. Biggest question is Brandon Woodruff. Is he going to perform in the rotation after having Tommy John surgery?
It wasn't Tommy John. I think it was rotator cuff surgery. So honestly, that's a little scarier. Because people tend to recover pretty well from their first Tommy John. Woodruff, it was a shoulder injury. I know that for sure. I don't know what exact surgery it was, but it was a shoulder surgery. So that is their rotation. How do we feel like just in general, like the strength of their rotation? Let's say Woodruff comes back fully healthy. They have Woodruff, Peralta, Tobias Myers, Cortez, and whatever they get out of Gasser, Ashby, DL Hall, Tyler Alexander as guys. How do we feel about the strength of this rotation?
I like it.
Yeah,
Another team where I just like the top three.
yeah, I like the top three. A decent bit. We'll see on Tobias Myers, but I definitely like Woodruff and Peralta to give you great production. I think another important, type of note too is this is a team that last year didn't necessarily have great starting pitching, and they won 94 games. Was it, Finn? That sounds about right. Um, they had a pretty good year a year ago, even without great starting pitching. And I think a big part of that was their defense. Another part of that was their bullpen, which, like we mentioned, has seen a little bit of a hit. Their bullpen consists of long reliever left-hander Connor Thomas, left-hander Tyler Alexander, and left-hander Jared Canning, who's projected to be in a setup role for them. Additionally, in their bullpen, Elvis Peguero, Nick Mears, Brian Hudson, Joel Payamps, and closer Trevor McGill. How do we feel about this bullpen? And there are going to be some guys in the upper minors too that I am going to talk about that I think will definitely factor into their bullpen.
Honestly, I really like the depth in this one.
Yeah, I think it's solid. I think losing Williams will obviously always hurt, right? There's no way that losing him will hurt. But I feel very strongly about Tyler Alexander, who's their worst relief arm compared to what most teams' worst relief arms looks like. And keep in mind that's without like DL Hall, Robert Gasser, Brendan Woodruff. You bump a guy like Aaron Ashby to the bullpen, or maybe you bump DL Hall or Robert Gasser to the bullpen. I kind of like that as well, and I think there's clear ways for them to bring some strength to this bullpen. And I'll quickly talk about their upper minors guys. Um, Chad Patrick's a pretty solid, minor league pitcher who I think will be up really soon. He's almost 27 years old. Jacob Mizorowski is a 23-year-old with an 80 grade fastball who throws over 100 miles per hour. Thing is, he doesn't located in the zone very often. They played around a lot last season with him as a reliever, and I think he's probably going to make the majors as a reliever at some point this season. And one other big guy, or a couple other big guys, Abner Uribe in the minors. They've consistently been trying to figure it out with him. Electric stuff, get him in the strike zone a little bit more, and I really like it. And then Craig Yoho. We talk about replacing Devin Williams. If you want to replace him on a likeness, Craig Yoho is very similar as a pitcher. Great changeup, like the best changeup in the minor leagues a year ago. Produced ridiculous whiff rates on it. Nobody hit that changeup hard at all. Yeah, Craig Yoho, I think will be a big pitcher for them and potentially make a major league debut this year. How do we feel about their pitching staff in total, Finn?
Honestly, pretty good pitching staff.
Yeah, and it's never going to be in the flashy ways. Like the Brewers are never a super flashy team, but they always, turn out these great pitchers, even when you don't really, see them as great pitchers. You know, um, just to go over some more of their interesting prospects because they have a ton of them. Okay, it's really not fair how many interesting prospects they have. Jefferson Cuero, catcher who lost basically all of last season to injury. He'll be at the upper minors. I'm sure at some point they're going to trade William Contreras, and they're going to go from William Contreras to Jefferson Cuero, and nobody's going to notice a thing. Um, Wes Clark, I mentioned before with Reese Hoskins, Wes Clark could be the guy who comes up, who plays first base at a decently high level, but he's not a super interesting, or not a super like jump out of your seat prospect. Brock Wilken, fun corner infielder. He was a first round pick a couple seasons ago from them. Fun guy. Luke Adams is in Double A. Mike Bovey in Double A. Both are very unique hitter profiles. Luke Adams is a big power guy. Mike Bovey's more of a contact guy, but both of them I think could be very interesting. And when I say at Double A, they were projected to be at Double A at the start of the season. Luis Lara, a guy who's gotten really high in the majors at a super young age. I think he was only 19 at the season's end. He was an A+ ball. That's some really good stuff. And then Jesus Mate is I think the guy who will be the next, maybe not the next, but at some point in his time is going to be the number one prospect in baseball. A year ago, he got up to he didn't even get out of the DSL. I think it's very possible that he will, be in high A next season at some point, and he will be the number one prospect in baseball at some point. He was ranked 17th on one of the publications. I'm not sure exactly which one, but he's been in the top 20 in a ton of publications. Jesus Mate is really fun, and he could be on the Churio track where he debuts as a 19-year-old. Milwaukee Brewers, they didn't really do much, but they already had a pretty solid team. Sure, they lost Willy Adames. They were still a 94 win team. Did you get confirmation on that, Finn? What was the win total?
It was 93.
93 wins. Just a little bit off, just a little bit. Yeah, I think this is a good team. I mean, we got our two questions for us. Unless you have any other comments on Milwaukee's offseason.
I don't.
Okay. Do we think they got better this offseason?
I'm sorry, I don't.
I don't think so either. But then the other question is, do we think they position themselves to be better in the future?
I do.
Yeah, this one's a lot more interesting for me because I think it's probably, maybe, I don't know, they get a comp pick for losing Willy Adames, so I'm sure they could find some way. It's Milwaukee; they'll probably draft pretty well there. So I think maybe. This is one of the stronger farm systems in baseball. I think Baseball America just released their top farm systems. Milwaukee was definitely in the top bunch. I think the interesting thing with Milwaukee is the depth of their farm system is kind of the big strong suit. Even if I do like the top end guys, I do like the depth a little bit more with them. Maybe their 10 through 20 guys are actually really strong and would be top 10 guys in most farm systems. So that's Milwaukee, unless you have anything else before we move on forward to Chicago, Finn.
We do need to give it an overall grade.
Overall grade, what do we give it?
I'll give it a C.
Yeah, I was gonna give it a C plus, B minus. I don't think they did anything poor. You could argue they should have signed Willy Adames, but it's Milwaukee. They're never going to re-sign Willy Adames. They don't have the funding for that. I mean, they probably have some type of funding for it, but it's not going to be something that they can consistently year over year commit to. So Willy Adames was always going to choose another team to go to.
And we're moving on to the Chicago Cubs. Their payroll last year was $229 million, and this year it went down to $186 million.
Dropped a good bit. About, what's that, $35 million? That's a big drop. All right. What did this offseason look like that dropped them so much?
They traded Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, to say the least. What was the rest of their offseason like?
Rest of their offseason got Kyle Tucker. Gave up Isaac Paredes. a third base prospect, and Hayden Wachensky. He was a death wish.
Yep.
Some of his non-tenders are kind of interesting. They non-tendered Patrick Wisdom, Albert Alazale, Nick Madrigal.
Yeah, so some like important guys, and there are previous non-tenders, or that were previous important players that are non-tenders now. 100%. They they made a couple other moves. Did they
They
sign?
did sign John Birdie.
They signed John Birdie. That was their only free agent acquisition.
They signed Brad Keller too, but that's a minor league deal. One Ray.
Okay. And then they signed Matthew Boyd as well on a major league contract, multi-year as well.
Yeah, it was a 2-year, the
Yeah.
2025 and 2026 seasons.
Yep. And then they made a trade for Ryan Presley with the Houston Astros.
Go to the depth charts. And we'll start with the lineup. Starting with Ian Happ in left. Kyle Tucker in right. Seiya Suzuki at DH. Michael Bush at first base. Interesting, but he's hitting cleanup.
Hmm.
Dansby Swanson at shortstop. Nico Horner at second. Pete Crow Armstrong in center. Matt Shaw at third. And rounding it out, batting ninth is Miguel Amaya, the catcher.
So I think a very important thing with the Cubs is this catcher spot for them. They signed Don Gomes, I believe, correct?
They have Carson Kelly on their bench.
Carson Kelly, Jan Gomes, Carson Kelly, same player, right? Um, they have had an interesting go of things at the catcher position the past couple years. It was supposed to be Miguel Amaya. It was supposed to take over the reins for Wilson Contreras. It hasn't really played out that way. Rest of their bench, John Birdie, like you mentioned, Alexander Canario, had some prospect intrigue at one point. That's worn off a little bit. And then Gage Workman, who was a Rule 5 pick this past offseason. I think something that they're doing really good here. I mean, Gage Workman, bats left-handed, can play all three infield spots. All three of their infielders with Horner, Swanson, and Matt Shaw are batting right-handed. So Gage Workman can take them out of the lineup on days where they're facing right-handed pitching from time to time, give them all the rest that they need. I think they're doing that pretty well. That's just a savvy move on the part of the Cubs. How do we feel about the rest of this lineup, like quality wise?
Also, another bench bat I wanted to shout out, John Birdie, just because he pretty much plays everywhere.
Quality wise, how do we feel about this lineup?
Honestly, I like it. What I'm not liking necessarily is catcher.
Yeah. Obviously, we're not liking the catcher position of Miguel Amaya and Carson Kelly. Carson Kelly is, pretty decent. If he could have a bounce back season, I think that is in a horrible position for them. And I think another fun thing too, really putting your success in the hands of your younger players with Matt Shaw and Pete Crow Armstrong, I think is something that I'm really going to enjoy. Trading Bellinger this for what was essentially a salary dump, I think was a savvy move because now you have Pete Crow Armstrong, who I think has a really high ceiling. And I think we both really like what he could potentially become. We liked him on the Mets roster. We didn't like when the Mets traded him for a half season Javier Baez. I think it's really good. And Matt Shaw, I think should be the favorite to win NL Rookie of the Year. I think he will. Unless Roki Sasaki or Bubba Chandler have a Paul Skeens type rookie season. I think Matt Shaw will win Rookie of the Year. So I guess that's my first bold prediction. We'll see if I carry that in the bold predictions episode.
Honestly, I have to agree with you on the Pete Crow Armstrong thing. I wanted to personally go up and slap whoever our GM was at the time.
um, Billy Epler, I believe. Hopefully, I'm not throwing him in the dust in the dirt for I forgot the other guy's name. Okay, well, we'll move on. Do you have any more lineup notes actually before we move on to their rotation?
Nope, now for the rotation. Their ace is obviously Shota and Yaga, followed by a pretty solid two in Justin Steele,
Mm-hmm.
followed by Jameson Taeyuk, Matthew Boyd, Javier Assad, and potentially Colin Ray.
Yeah. So one thing I do like to point out here, the use of the six-man rotation is possible. I don't know if it's necessarily something that they're going to lock in at the start of opening day. It's something that I could see them doing um, from time to time because some of these guys, like, Matt Boyd has some legit injury concerns, right? I think Colin Ray will likely just be a bullpen arm who, takes a long, who has a lot of bulk at the beginning of the season. Um, Otherwise, with this rotation, I kind of like it, right? Javier Assad is a kitchen sink five starter, right? Like that's how a lot of five starters are going to be. And Jameson Taillon gave them some pretty solid innings last season. And if you look at a run prevention basis, Matt Boyd was really good last year. If you look at an innings eating basis, Matt Boyd was not very good last year. So I think there's some volatility with Matt Boyd there. I think Taillon was not very good a year or two ago, but you know I do kind of like this middle part of the rotation, and I really love Shota and Justin Steele. And I don't know how you feel, but I feel they're kind of on the same tier as pitchers, like with Shota and Steele. I don't really think it's an ace number two guy thing. I think it's two really strong starters at the top of the rotation. So, do you have anything else on that rotation?
Nope, time for the bullpen.
All right.
It has their projected closer to be Ryan Presley, who I don't know how much he has left in the tank. Hasn't been good the last couple of years.
Yep.
Then goes to Porter Hodge as a setup man, with Ryan Brazier as the other setup man. Tyson Miller, Caleb Thielbar, and Julian Merriweather are all middle relievers, with Keegan Thompson as the log reliever.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fact with Presley, he has had a 3.5 ERA the past two seasons, which doesn't sound that bad, but when it's a high leverage reliever, that's going to lead to a lot more blown saves than you would probably like. Porter Hodge last season spent a good bit of time in their closure position, and a lot of it was him and Hector Neris, and Hector Neris closed a good 2024. I would have never thought we would be there, but we were. Um, yes, I think it's just kind of a weird group. Like Ryan Brazier was on waivers this offseason, like just a bunch of weird stuff. They don't necessarily have a great lefty either. Caleb Thibar's 38 years old and throws in the low 90s. Like this is a one of the more poor bullpens in baseball, and certainly for like teams that are positioning themselves to be contenders. Uh, do you have anything else on them? Like I'm very confident that they'll have multiple guys closing out games for them at some point this season.
I would not be too shocked if they end up having to trade for a closer.
I wouldn't either. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't either.
Because
I
they
guess,
have to try to contend this year after trading for Kyle Tucker.
yeah. That'll transition, I guess, to some of like the other guys here. We'll start with pitchers. Cade Horton, I think, is like the main guy who I do want to highlight. He was projecting to be the like like the number one pitching prospect in baseball. But then he shows up to 2024, his velocity's down. He misses the entire season pretty much from that point on, from like July on after he got promoted to AAA. And he's now a non-roster invitee to spring training. We'll see how that goes. He's only 20, almost going to be 24 years old. Jordan Wicks at one point was a pretty fun prospect for them. He's made major league appearances. We'll see. Cody Poteet was the only player in the Cody Bellinger trade. Um, Other non-roster invitees are Brad Keller, Brandon Birdsell, and Anthony Santos. There, in the bullpen side of things, Trevor Richards, Phil Bickford, Brandon Hughes, Brooks Kriske, Brandon Heller, Riley Martin are non-roster invitees. Eli Morgan, they got in trade from Cleveland this year. Luke Little, like a very hard-throwing left-handed pitcher. They hopefully can see some bullpen time out of Nate Pearson, failed top prospect from Toronto. Jack Neely, Daniel Palencia are some pretty interesting relief prospects who I think could see some major league time. Other guys for them on the hitting side of things, Moises Ballesteros is going to be an upper minors catcher who hits his way to value. I think he's going to be really fun there. We'll see if he makes his major league debut this year. I think it's possible he'll be 21, 22 throughout the entire year. Pablo Aliendo is more of a power hitting catcher who plays some solid defense. He's going to be in the upper minors. I think he's kind of fun. They have two really decent guys there. Jonathan Long is a guy who can really swing it, and we'll see if he can find himself a position. But we'll see. I hope he can find a position because he can really swing it. James Triantos, utility prospect, not really sure if he's going to ever hit for enough slug, but, only time will tell. Ed Howard, used to be a top prospect, falling off a little bit. Jefferson Rojas was a 19-year-old who got up to high A a year ago. Shortstop, could potentially stick there. Really fun. Toolsy guy. We'll see how it goes. Owen Casey spent basically the entire season in AAA a year ago. He hits for a ton of power. We'll see what he ends up being. Kevin Alcantara, I think, got up to the big league for one game last season. Swing and miss is pretty real, but we'll see. Christian Franklin is a non-roster invitee who I think should have probably been selected in the Rule 5 draft from some team. His feel for hits pretty good, and as long as he gets the ball off the ground, there is potential for a decent slug with him. So that'll do it for Chicago. We'll move to grading them. Do we think they got better this offseason, Finn?
I do.
Yes, me too. 100%. And then, do we think they position themselves better for the future with this offseason?
No.
Wash. I see with them, I feel like it's kind of a wash because sure, I would if they don't sign Kyle Tucker, they probably did set themselves up worse because if you know that Kyle Tucker will not be here next season, just give me Isaac Paredes and Cam Smith, but there's no guarantee that is the case either. So we'll ultimately see. What would we grade this offseason, though? At the end of the day, what would we grade it?
I'd go with B.
I
Plus.
I would go a B. I would bump it up to potentially an A minus if they would have signed Tanner Scott, but their owner was not willing to go. Who's not willing to give Tanner Scott an extra year on his contract to sign with the Chicago Cubs. I think the quote was that they are trying to break even. And let me tell you, they have cut payroll this year. And they made a ton of profit a year ago. So we'll see. Ultimately, I think this was a good offseason. I would give it a B plus. I would bump up to maybe an AA minus if they would have just bargained up a little bit more money for Tanner Scott. All right, so we are here with the St. Louis Cardinals. Last season in 2024, they ran a payroll of 176 million. Now in 2025, they are projected 125 million, a $50 million pay cut. How did they do that, you might ask? Well, their losses were pretty big. Paul Goldschmidt, free agent. Andrew Kittredge, free agent. Matt Carpenter, free agent. Their only additions were Nick Anderson, Ryan Velarde, and Jose Barrero. Velarde, Nick Anderson, and Barrero are all on minor league contracts. So no major league free agents signed. They declined club options on Kyle Gibson, Lance Lynn, and Keenan Middleton. They're saving a ton of money. That's their goal here. And they made one trade. They traded for Michael Hellman, who's a major league minimum player, and they acquired him from the Twins for cash. So, as you can see here, St. Louis is not trying to spend a ton of money. What does that look like on the field now that they have done it? Well, their projected lineup looks like Mason Wynn at shortstop, Alec Burleson at DH, Wilson Contreras at first base, Brendan Donovan at second base, Nolan Arenado at third base, Lars Nootbaar in left field, Jordan Walker in right field, Ivan Herrera at catcher, Victor Scott II in center field, with a bench of Pedro Paez as the backup catcher, Nolan Gorman, Thomas Sagasi, and Michael Ciani as the backup outfielder. Finn, what do you have on the Cardinals lineup?
Honestly, just what is going on here? What are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily bad, is the one thing that I do want to point out. But, like, I just don't understand the direction with them, right? You have Wilson Contreras, who, you know, when he's been on the field the past couple years, has been one of the better hitting catchers in baseball. So I don't think it's a bad decision to move him to first base, right? Because he hasn't, gone by well as a fielder, as a first base, as a catcher the past couple years. So moving him to first base is fine, especially if you're losing Paul Goldschmidt. That's fine. And Ivan Herrera, Ivan Herrera, there we go. I don't know why I second guessed his name. Had a pretty good season a year ago when he played in the majors. So I think that's perfectly fine. But then it's like, there's a bunch of good hitters here, but there's not any like great hitters. Like Brendan Donovan, Nootbaar, Arenado, Mason Wynn, Burleson, right? Like these are good hitters. None of them are great. There's some volatility with Jordan Walker there playing right field. Nolan Gorman was a guy who I was really high on a year ago. We know how that played out. I got an F on my grade that you handed out for me. I got an F. I mean, do you have any other notes on this? Like, it's just a very like, I guess it's balanced, at least is how I would describe this lineup. But nothing there necessarily scares me with their lineup. All right, the rotation: Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Miles Michaelis, Andre Palante, and Steven Matz. I want to quickly note Andre Palante had a really good year a year ago. He gets a shit ton of ground balls. He moved from the bullpen to the rotation a year ago. I think he's a great find by the St. Louis Cardinals, who otherwise have been a pretty bad development organization. They typically, give guys just they shaft their own players. They've done it with Jordan Walker. They've done it with Ivan Herrera. They've done it like they do it with everybody. All right, they're not doing a very good job right now at getting their players up into the majors and getting them acclimated. They can get them up to the majors, but they're sending them right back down 2 weeks later. Is how it's been. Finn, how do we feel about this rotation?
Pretty much the only two things I like about it are the top and Palante.
Yeah, like sure, Sonny Gray's fine, but why is he like, why is he still on this team? Like that's how I feel about it. Why is Sonny Gray still here? Right? Why is Eric Fetty still here? He's good. Why is he still here? I'm not sure. I guess they do see a potential to make a run of things. They did win 81 games a year ago, but I'm not sure. Right? I don't know what's going on. And I don't necessarily hate the names here. Like I'd rather not have Michaelis and Steven Matz in my rotation, but I like Palante, I like Fetty, I like Gray. Like they're gonna be good. I don't think there's any ace there necessarily though either. So do you have anything else on them, or do we go bullpen time now?
Bullpen time.
Bullpen time. Gordon Gershefo, he's been a big innings eater in the minors. He's their long relief arm. I think he could get some rotation time. Zach Thompson, left-handed reliever, who could also get some rotation time, and Matthew Liberatore, left-handed reliever, who could also get some rotation time. Ooh. Additionally, they also have Jojo Romero and John King. They have a ton of lefties here. They also have Ryan Helsley as their closer. Ryan Fernandez, who was a pretty good Rule 5 pick a year ago, and Kyle Leahy. This is honestly not a bad bullpen, and I can't hate on this aspect of the team. It's just, once again, like, what are we doing with Ryan Helsley here, is how I feel about it. So, do you got anything on their bullpen that you really want to point out?
Ryan Helsley is expiring. If you aren't winning, you have to trade him.
100%. And I think they're just going to go out and try to win. It's how I see it. Like, if they did absolutely nothing, I think they're going to go out there and try to win and turn a big profit on a team that they cut $50 million of payroll in year to year. So I think that's what they're doing. I don't hate it, but it's a lot of what's wrong with, the parody of Major League Baseball right now. So I think, the Cardinals are to blame, to say the least. Fun prospects with them. Jimmy Crooks and Leandro Bernal are some, pretty fun catching prospects. Lucan Baker has never quite cracked the big leagues. We'll see. It's not a super strong system either, I think, is another important thing to know. JJ Weatherholt, first round pick a year ago, I think is a very good prospect. I think he will eventually make the majors. It could be in not much more than a year or two's time. So I think that's really good. Michael Sagazi is one of their prospects. He's in the big leagues now. I think that's there. And then, their pitching isn't too bad. Michael McGreevy, similarly to Gordon Greshefo, has, been a big innings eater in the minors. Tink Hence and Sem Robers are some really fun pitching prospects they have. And then TK Roby missed a lot of last season. TK Roby was a part of the Jordan Montgomery trade, as well as Thomas Sagazi. Quinn Matthews is their top prospect, I believe. He's gonna hopefully, be a pretty good pitcher for them in the majors. It's not a super strong system necessarily, but it's the St. Louis Cardinals. Like we said, they didn't really do much but shed salary this offseason. Do you have anything else, or are we ready to grade them? Finn said, let's get the Cardinals over with. But with me, I don't necessarily say that they got that much worse. Like, we're here getting angry at them for not picking a direction, and in reality, they lost Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. Okay, like, I'm sure they can fill that very easily. Just fill those inning eating guys with guys who ate innings in the minors a year ago. And then they lost Paul Goldschmidt, who was a league average hitter at first base a year ago. That's all that they lost. I'm sure that as long as there's some level of competency, they can replace league average first base production and innings eaters. So I don't necessarily think they got much worse from a year ago, but I also don't think they set themselves up better for the future, because why is Arenado still on this team? Why is Ryan Helsley still on this team when you have to pay him following this season? I just think it's a very bad process with them. So how do you feel, Finn?
I basically agree with all you just said. with the ticket direction thing, it's if you're gonna keep these guys, you have to sign something to get this team better, and they
And
didn't do it.
they didn't do that. They shed $50 million in payroll, and that's it. They just shed all this payroll. They do have TV rights deal up in the air right now, so I understand it. But god damn it, you're not going to land a TV deal, a luxurious TV deal, winning 78 games every year. So just can we grade them? Do we have to just say that it's an F?
It's an F.
Because they just did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. They at least use that extra $50 million to, I don't know, take some salary back and get some type of young player in return for taking a salary. They didn't do any of that. And I understand they needed to cut money. They're spending with the likes of like the bottom 10 teams in baseball. This is the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm not sure how we got to this position that we are in right now. Yeah. Do you have any other comments before we move forward to the last two teams in this division?
Nope. Okay, time for the Reds, who went up from 100 million to 103 million.
So for context, that means they didn't add anything. They just had arbitration costs to go up for players. But we will continue. What did the offseason look like?
They did not sign any major league contracts, but they do have a couple of notable trades.
Yeah.
They got Gavin Lux for a competitive balanced round A, and it would help if it told me the guy.
Uh, it was keep talking. I'll pull the name up. I don't know why I can't remember it off the top of my head.
They traded Jonathan India and Joey Weaver for Brady Singer. Good add to their pitching. And that was just really all that they did.
They also traded Fernando Cruz for Jose Trevino as well. Not a good move necessarily, but it is a move that they made. Um, for context, the player in Gavin Lux was Mike Sirota, who was a third round pick a year ago for the Cincinnati Reds. So that was the move that they made. Um, I mean, I don't think that they necessarily had a bad offseason. I don't like that they didn't, sign any free agents because I think they could have, right? They're going to get a ton more money once this team gets a lot better, and they're going to be healthier too. Hopefully, some of their infield stuff really bounced back. They had a down year from Noel Marte a year ago, and uh, they didn't get any production out of Matt McClain a year ago. So I think they're going to be a better team. It's just, no. I do like these trades though. Bottom line, uh, let's get to the depth chart.
Yeah, I'm on there now. Their lineup starts with TJ Friedel playing center, followed up by Ellie De La Cruz playing shortstop, Matt McClain playing second. Interesting, Tyler Stevenson is batting cleanup. Jake Fraley playing right. Spencer Steer at first. Javier Candelario at third. Gavin Lux at DH. And Austin Hayes at left.
Yeah, with a bench of Kristen Encarnacion Strand, Jose Trevino as the backup catcher, Santiago Espinal, and Stuart Fairchild. This is, of course, via Fangraphs. Big things to point out, Finn. There's a bunch of guys who I think positionally could definitely change by the time spring training's over. For me, like Hayes starting in left field isn't a guaranteed. TJ Friedel could definitely be supplanted by, let's say they like Gavin Lux playing second base and they decide to move Matt McClain out to center field. That could be something that definitely happens. I think there's a lot that is subject to change with the Reds in spring training. And like, okay, if Christian Encarnacion Strand hits extremely well in spring training and was the first base spot, Spencer Steer probably moves out to left field, right? I think that there's a lot that can still change with this Reds team, and especially with Gavin Lux out there, who can kind of play everywhere, along with Spencer Steer, who can play a lot of different places, and McLean, who can play a lot of different places. There's a lot that can definitely change, even on a day to day, with this Reds team. And I think that's what makes them really fun. How do we feel about them quality wise?
Mm. Quality wise, don't hate it. They need to figure out left field.
Yeah, I mean, 2023 All Star Austin Hayes is their left fielder. So that is something to mention. Um, I think that quality wise, I don't hate it as well. I feel very similar to how I did about St. Louis's lineup. Like, I don't necessarily see any huge holes, but I don't see any huge strengths besides Ellie De La Cruz in this lineup. I think that if everything goes right with Matt McLean, hell yeah, that's awesome. If everything goes right with Tyler Stevenson, hell yeah, that's awesome. And then everybody else, it's like, okay, I can see a pretty realistic path to, like a league average hitter there. It's just, I don't know what necessarily if there's any high ceilings anywhere throughout this lineup besides Ellie De La Cruz, who I also think, there's some volatility to his game, and like McLean as well, who I do think has a pretty high ceiling. There's some volatility to this game. Um, yeah, I mean, how does that kind of sum up what you feel about it?
Honestly, yes.
Yeah, like I don't know, it's probably not a bottom 10 lineup in baseball, but it's definitely not a top 10 lineup in baseball. So it kind of finds itself in that range where it's like, I don't really know how to feel about it, but it's not bad or good, is that's how I would describe it. Yeah, I mean, even on their bench side of things, like Trevino, like, was a fine guy to get as a bench player, but at the cost of Fernando Cruz, who had a like 99th percentile K rate last year. Like, I don't know if it was the move. Um, yeah, you ready to move to rotation, or you got more in their lineup?
I'm ready to move to rotation.
All right, let's hear it.
Hunter Green is their SP1. SP2 is Brady Singer, who they got in a trade.
Yeah,
SP3 is Andrew Abbott. SP4 is Dick Martinez, who in my opinion is kind of overpaid. And SP5 is Nick Odella.
yeah. So I think a fun thing with them, right? I kind of disagree with you on Nick Martinez. I think he got market value for a third starter. I think Andrew Abbott wasn't healthy a year ago very often, and Nick Lodolo wasn't healthy very much a year ago. Nick Martinez is a very fun pitcher, and I do think that this is one of the better Reds rotations we've seen in a while, and I think obviously a lot of that has to do with Hunter Green, who just had a great season a year ago, and for me, it's a top 100 player in baseball. Um, but I don't think it's like a super strong necessarily rotation. I think it's just a pretty good one. I want to know what you think about it.
Honestly, like the top two, and I don't hate the rest of it. There's nobody I'm looking at and I'm like, this guy is in a starting rotation.
Yeah, I feel very similarly about it. Like, I really like Hunter Green. I don't think he's necessarily a slam dunk one. I think he's a guy who you're fine with being your one. And then I think Singer is very similar. Like, I would rather him be a mid rotation guy, but if he's my two, like, I don't necessarily hate it a ton. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. And I think um, the rest of it rounds out like decently well, right? Like, there's some upside with Lodolo and Abbott if they can finally be healthy. Um, we'll ultimately see at the end of the day. And I think Graham Ashcraft, who's in their bullpen, he started a ton of games. We'll see we'll see what it becomes. He throws very hard, and I would assume at some points this year he's going to make some starts with guys being out. So yeah, you got anything else on rotation?
Nope. gonna go to the bullpen.
Sounds good.
Closer, Alexis Diaz. Sit up man one, Taylor Rogers. Sit up man two, Emilio Pagan. Middle relievers are Sam Moll, Tony Santanlin, and Brent Suter, and Scott Barlow. And their long reliever is Graham Ashcraft. I
Yeah.
like that they have two lefties.
Yeah, immediately. Yeah, I like that they have two lefties in there. We didn't
Oh, three.
mention. Wait, who's the third one here? Oh yeah, Suter, Mullen, Rogers. Yeah, I don't know how I looked at it and I was like, yes, that is definitely two. But no, it's three. You're right. Um, I really like the Taylor Rogers move. They traded Braxton Roxby, who isn't like a super high profile prospect for them. And they get a guy who's been a pretty good, relief arm for a couple of years, and I like it. I like it to add Taylor Rogers into the mix. Him and Pagan, I think, is a decent setup options for Alexis Diaz, who has been maybe not like a clear cut closer these past couple of years, but he's been a great relief arm to have, and I'm fine if he's closing out ball games for my team. Sam Lowell, a guy who gets a ton of ground balls, I think they found something with him. Tony Sandlin, we'll see. Brent Suter, not something you're jumping up and down for. We'll see. And then Scott Barlow had a couple really good years ago with Kansas City, so we'll see what it becomes. I don't think it. I think very similarly of their bullpen as I do their rotation or their lineup. It's like it's not in the top 10, but it's not in the bottom 10. Is how I feel about this bullpen. How do you what do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I agree. But I look at this, I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, like there's nothing that gets me jumping. Is how I feel about it. It's not bad though. I can't say that I am throwing out of everything imaginable. Like it's just not something I'm super excited about.
It's also
Um,
not something I'm reading.
yeah, I would agree. You ready for just some prospects or other guys that could produce for them?
Yep.
Catcher Will Banfield, yeah, he was a Rule 5 pick. At or that's completely wrong. He was not a Rule 5 pick. He's just Rule 5 eligible. He could be kind of fun, but I don't necessarily see it. Edwin Rios, Dodger legend. Just figured I would give him a shout out. Um, Tyler Callahan, one of their failed type prospects. Cooper Bowman was a guy who uh, was Rule 5'd by them. It's not we're not sure if he's going to make the major league team. If he doesn't, he would be returned to Oakland. He could be in the mix for some middle infield time. It's potentially a thing that Gavin Lux has supplanted him from playing time. Sal Stewart, you know, is a fun hitting prospect. He's definitely a guy who's going to get there as a bat. He was a competitive balance pick a couple of years ago. Victor Acosta, switch hitting infielder, was 20 years old last year, got up to high A. That is very impressive. Noel V. Marte, currently projected to be a depth guy, just hasn't found his footing quite yet in the major leagues. Could be something fun. Cam Collier, you know, Camp Collier, he could really hit the ball. He's probably going to move to third base or to first base. Currently playing a good bit of third base in the minors. Got up to high A last year as a 20-year-old. Like this guy, I don't know how he's not given as much credit as he could be, but I mean, this could be a really high-end prospect at the midseason evaluations. It's very possible that if he has a good year, he is not going to be ranked next year as a prospect as he will be graduated. Um, Ricardo Cabrera, decent toolsy infielder. He's fun to mention. Um, And then moving to shortstop, Edwin Arroyo, switch hitter. I think he's their number one prospect. That's definitely not true. He's their number one hitting prospect. Um, he's really good. He looks like he can really stick at short. Uh, Will Brennan uh, and Reese Hines are guys who could factor in the outfield. Reese Hines could also play a little bit as third and first base. Um, those are guys who have played in the big leagues, haven't necessarily established themselves a spot in the current Reds team. Um, and we'll skip forward to some pitching prospects. Rhett Lauder has major league debuted before. I'm sure there's a possibility of him winning a rotation spot. Connor Phillips, big stuff guy, will probably move to the bullpen at some point. Chase Petty has made it all the way up to AAA as a 21-year-old a year ago. That's going to be really fun. And Wade Miley's on their IL. First round pick Chase Burns is also in the system from Wake Forest. He has crazy stuff, so like some of the best stuff in the draft a year ago. And yeah, that kind of does it for the Reds prospect guys. It's not a bad system. It's probably, once again, they might be bottom 10, but I don't think it's like a bottom. It's nowhere close to an average bottom 5 system. It's not too bad. Yeah, that's Cincinnati Reds. Uh, we will now take a quick break and go forward to our final team, the Pittsburgh Pirates. I will edit that out. Finn, what do we think about Cincinnati? Do we think they got better this offseason, or do we think they got worse?
I think they got better.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. They did a ton of trades. I don't like the Trevino one. I like the Taylor Rogers one. I like the Gavin Lux one. I like the Brady Singer one. I think they got a little bit better. Obviously, they lose Jonathan India in the Brady Singer deal, but I do think that they got a little bit better this offseason, just making their roster better. And getting Matt McClain back definitely helps. Do we think they've set themselves up better for the future?
I do.
I think I would agree.
Barely.
I don't really know if it's better or worse, because like India versus Singer going forward long term, I don't know how much better. I'm sure you would rather have Sirota in that comp pick long term, but they need to get this team good so they can compete while they still have Ellie De La Cruz making major league minimum. Like I do understand the moves that they made. I would say like it's like a null for me. They didn't necessarily get too much worse in my opinion. I don't think they got really any that much better going forward long term. That's how I feel about that. And then what would you grade their offseason?
I'd go with C.
I think I would go a lot higher than that. I would give this at least a B plus. I think in that range is how I like them.
I don't
I, I,
like that they didn't sign any free agents.
I would also agree on that standpoint. I think with them being a smaller market team, they're going to want to see some big profits before they do any spending. I don't think they want to project for more profit this season before they spend. So I think that's possibly what is going on. Do you got any other Reds comments?
Nope.
So the final team of the NL Central, the Pittsburgh Pirates. This is an interesting one because a year ago they were very decent at the start of the year, and then they were not very decent. Um, a year ago they ran a payroll of $84 million. Going into this season, as of right now, they are on pace for $70 million. They have actually added a couple of guys. Notable additions for them. They've agreed to a major league contract with Tommy Pham, Adam Frazier, Tim Mazza, Caleb Ferguson, and then those are their main major league contract guys. Andrew McCutchen, obviously, they agreed to bring back. Elvis Alvarado, they agreed to bring back. They didn't do nothing. They non-tender Brian De La Cruz, Connor Joe. They They lose Yasmani Grandal, Aroldis Chapman, Jalen Beeks to free agency. They decline a club option of Marco Gonzalez, and that's essentially all that they did this offseason. Besides trade-wise, they added Spencer Horwitz. In return, they sent out Josh Hardle, Luis L. Ortiz, and Michael Kennedy, who I think are some pretty fun guys. And they did bring in Emmanuel Valdez from the Boston Red Sox. I think this is a interesting offseason on the part of Pittsburgh. Finn, at the end of it, read off to me, what is their depth chart currently looking like?
Their lineup is looking like Tommy Pham leading off and playing left. Brian Reynolds batting second, playing right. O'Neill Cruz batting third, playing center. Andrew McCutchen DHing. Joey Bart catching. Andrew Rodriguez playing first. Nick Gonzalez playing second. Brian Hayes playing third. And Isaiah Kiner-Falefa playing shortstop. Why isn't Spencer Horwitz in this lineup?
I'm sure the viewers saw it, but I made a face as soon as you said Andy Rodriguez playing first base. Apparently Spencer Horwitz had wrist surgery within the past couple weeks, and I just hadn't heard of that until just now. I will search up the severity of this wrist surgery. For right now, just assume Horwitz will be back by the regular season. What do you think about this lineup if Spencer Horwitz is in the lineup, Finn?
There's nothing on here I really hate.
Okay.
The John Catcher,
though. I'll say this. Joey Bart had a really good year a year ago. That being said, it was only 80 games, I believe. Not anything super significant. He was DFA'd a year ago at the start of the season, right? Spencer Horwitz had wrist surgery today. He's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks, which will line him up right when spring training ends. So we'll see. I would assume he'll be back really early into the season as I do another hiccup. With me, I do look at this team, and I do kind of wonder where the slug's going to come from, because Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is your shortstop, and he brings nothing to you with the bat, right? I'm okay with that. He plays a decent shortstop. You can do a little bit worse than IKF. But then you add Brian Hayes into the mix, who also does that for you. And, Joey Bart has done much better in the past year. But, the last 3 seasons, Joey Bart has not been a player who could even stay in the majors, basically, because his bat was so poor. So there could easily be 3 holes in this lineup, not even just holes, giant holes in this lineup. Projected bench: Jared Triolo, Adam Frazier, Joshua Palacios, and Jason DeLay. I think is kind of fun. I don't think the bench is anything horrible. I'm a little concerned about what the back of this lineup could look like. And then even with that, you can find some consistency with Reynolds, McCutchen. O'Neill Cruz has had some injury concerns, and, I hope he doesn't strike out very often, because when his strikeouts are under control, he's very awesome. And O'Neill Cruz was also a pretty great center field defender in the limited time that he got there. So I expect him to improve a little bit more this year. I ranked him 77th, I think, on my top 100. I'm in on O'Neill Cruz this season. I don't know if there's necessarily anything that I'm afraid of here. Unlike the Reds and the Cardinals, I do think this is probably a bad lineup, but I don't think it's bordering on the worst in baseball, is how I feel about it. Do you have similar quails on them?
Yeah, I do. There's nothing jumping off the page of me.
Yeah, except the Spencer Horwitz no longer being in the lineup thing. I think it is a lot better with Spencer Horwitz in the lineup as well. He had a pretty good year a year ago. It's just even for first baseman, like he's a good hitter and like an above average first baseman still. But it's not anything like world breaking versus like a lot of other teams have a bunch of guys who are huge difference makers even relative to their position. So we'll see. I'm not sure if there's ever going to be enough slug from this lineup, but I don't think that's what the strength of the 2024 5 Pittsburgh Pirates were going to be. I mean, it's also worth noting that this is a team with a $70 million payroll. Like, Jesus, man, you're not even breaking 100. Like, come on, we can do a little bit more, but they decided not to do that. Um, Pitching rotation wise, obviously there's a couple guys that are missing here because they're in the minors currently, but they're going to be in the majors. In their rotation right now, Paul Skeens, Mitch Keller, Jared Jones is their top three. Finn, how do we feel about the top three right there?
Pretty good top three.
Like, I really like that top three. I think it's electric. Skeens. Y'all will soon see. I think I'm very high on Paul Skeens. Mitch Keller, like forever, has been a pretty solid pitcher, and you always hope that the year that you were going into would be the year for Mitch Keller. And I think, he's kind of found what he's going to be year in and year out these past couple of years. Jared Jones, I think, is like super exciting and honestly has a little bit more ceiling that he could tap into. Like, he could be a guy who strikes out 10 per nine if things go well. And then, the rest of the rotation is Bailey Falter and Yohan Oviedo as of right now. I think these are positions that could 100% be won by different guys in spring training. Bailey Falter is good. I think in an average major league rotation, he probably slots in as the 5 potentially, and Oviedo is a guy who will get you some ground balls, and you hope to be good with it. I think it's dumb of me to not mention some of the other guys that they have on the up and up as well, because they have some guys that are in their minor leagues right now that are very important to mention. Michael Burrows could very well be a back end of the rotation arm. Braxton Ashcraft is a guy who, if he had stayed healthy the past couple of years, would be in the major league rotation like right now, and would probably be up there with, Skeens and Mitch Keller, like in that part of the rotation. Like, his stuff's that good. It's just he's had a really hard time staying healthy. Bubba Chandler, I mentioned it in our last predictions episode. I think Bubba Chandler has an argument, just like Jackson Jobe and just like Roki Sasaki, to be the best pitching prospect in baseball. I think he's really fun. Thomas Harrington, like, I think the floor with this guy is a major league starting pitcher. Like, I think at the top of this minor league system, they have a ton of guys who can fill out bullpen and rotation spots. I think they're just extremely strong here, and I really like what's going on. And then you go to Sean Sullivan, who is a guy who, once he moves to the bullpen, which I think he ultimately will, he's a lefty who's going to be extremely funky and sitting in the low 90s, and it's just going to be disgusting. I really like the depth for the rotation of the Pittsburgh Pirates. I will let you get anything out that you would want to say on the Pittsburgh Pirates rotation wise.
Rotation wise, really like the top three. I kind of would like to see a better fifth starter.
And I'm 100% confident that somebody from that group of 5 names will materialize into the 5th starter spot at some point in 2025. So, bullpen, Finn. David Bednar is their closer. Dennis Santana, Colin Holderman, Carmen Mazinski, Caleb Ferguson, Kyle Nicholas, Tim Mazza, and Joey Wentz. Joey Wentz, kind of a long man guy, not anything too, off the page with you. Caleb Ferguson and Tim Mazza, I think, is a solid pair of lefties to have in there. And then Carmen Mazinski, like, he's pretty legit. Dennis Santana has really found some stuff with Pittsburgh. David Bednar, we're hoping on a bounce back season. I do think this is a good bullpen. with Pittsburgh. I think this is a good bullpen, and I don't necessarily think it's a strength of the team because I think the rotation will be the strength of the Pittsburgh Pirates over the next couple of years. But I do think this is a solid bullpen. What do you think, Finn?
Yet again, there's nothing in the bullpen where I'm over here looking at it and being like, this guy is in a major league bullpen?
Yeah, like they're all seven guys. I think are real players. I mean, Kyle Nicholas, I guess, is the guy you can make a case for, but if that is your eighth reliever, like I don't really care. Like that's perfectly fine. So I think it's really good. I think they have a pretty solid bullpen here. I wish they would have spent like $15 million on a bat. Like their team would look so much better if they just spent a little bit more money on bats. Um, because they can really pitch. Is how I feel about Pittsburgh, and we'll see if they end up making any other moves. But I doubt they do. Um, Notable prospect guys for them. I mean, Billy Cook isn't necessarily a prospect, but he's a guy who could get some outfield time this season. He can play all three outfield spots pretty well. Nick York, I think, is a great prospect. Um, he's a guy who has really developed power in the upper minors with Pittsburgh, and his defensive versatility has really shown in Pittsburgh. Emmanuel Valdez, I mentioned earlier. Tamar Johnson isn't quite the prospect that people thought he would be coming out of high school, but he has certainly developed into a very interesting player, very three true outcome potential guy, but could be really good. Um, Malcolm Nunez is a non-roster invitee. Yusei Chang is an upper minors guy who can play shortstop legitimately. Leo Paguero is a guy, he's had some prospect type. Jack Brannigan is a guy who has some real, power potential. I think it's really legit with him. And Connor Griffin has the potential to be like one of the top prospects in baseball if all of his tools clicked. I mean, and there's a ton more guys in the infield. Um, Jack Sawinski is a guy who everybody was interested in at one point, and last year was horrible for him. Sammy Siani is basically a replica of his brother Michael Siani on the St. Louis Cardinals. They're very interesting. Lonnie White Jr., if he can stay healthy, there's a good player in there somewhere. Um, that's basically all I have on them prospect wise. I already mentioned a lot of their um, pitchers. I guess Anthony Solmateo, he's a guy who was hurt a year ago. His velo is down, but could be something very fun. That's Pittsburgh. Finn, what do we think about Pittsburgh? Do we think they got better this past offseason?
I don't.
I think they got better, but I don't know if it's really that much better. Like they added Horwitz instead of Rowdy Tellez. I think that's really good for them. And I think with younger guys coming up from the system, I think they got better. So maybe, yeah, they're going to be better than they were a year ago, but I don't think if any of it was on, merits of transactions that they made this offseason. I don't necessarily, they definitely set themselves up better this offseason, but again, it was only adding Spencer Horwitz. So if that's all that they did this offseason, I don't necessarily think I can give it a great grade, but I do think Pittsburgh could be pretty, there could be a good team in here somewhere. We need to see them hit, and I just don't know if they will hit. So I'll let you throw out a grade for this offseason. I am going to go a C minus.
I'm gonna go at D plus.
Yeah, this was a weird offseason for this division specifically because, I mean, who did anything? I mean, none of them really felt like they did much. Um, we're at the point of the episode where we kind of have to give our division winner prediction.
I have Chicago.
Finn, you have Chicago, and I think I have Chicago as well. I'm like 50-50 leaning between Chicago and Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee can still manage to have a good team. You know what, Finn? I'm stamping Milwaukee. Milwaukee will win the division for the second year in a row. Brandon Woodruff will be healthy. They have a decent top three with him, Tobias Myers, and Freddie Peralta. I think they'll still be great defensively, and we'll have a Jackson Churio breakout season. That's my prediction. I hope that will end up being right, and I won't look like an idiot. We'll finalize our final predictions in the predictions episode. So if this prediction is right, I get credit for it. If it's wrong, go based off of my predictions episode in the predictions video. Yeah. Do you have anything else before we wrap this one up, Finn?
I don't.
All right. So we will see you guys next week. That will actually be, I don't want to make promises, but I'm hoping that will be the top 50 episode. We will see you guys then.